The morning transit to Sector Prime took 3 hours from the industrial wastelands where Xenavos had spent her entire 24 years. She pressed her face against the grimy window, watching as the scenery transformed from rusted metal. Shanty's 2 gleaming towers of glass and chrome. Her reflection stared back, pale green skin with intricate silver markings that resembled delicate frost patterns. Large opalescent eyes that shifted from blue to violet depending on the light, and gossamer antennae that drooped slightly from nervousness. Xena tugged at her jacket for the 100th time, trying to hide the places where the synthetic fabric had worn thin. The garment had belonged to her late mother, a seamstress who had worked 16-hour days in the textile mills. It was the nicest thing Xena owned, though that wasn't saying much. The matching pants had a carefully concealed patch on one knee. And her shoes, well, she'd polished them until they almost looked presentable. Nexus Industries dominated the skyline like a crystalline mountain, its twisted spires reaching toward the artificial atmosphere dome. As the shuttle docked at the corporate platform, Xena's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd spent months preparing for this interview, studying corporate protocols and business ethics through secondhand data chips and library terminals. A junior analyst position wasn't glamorous, but it was her ticket out of the industrial sectors. The lobby was a cathedral of polished marble and floating holographic displays. Other candidates waited in plush seating areas, their expensive suits and confident postures making Xena feel like she'd wandered into the wrong building. She approached the reception desk, where a striking female of her own species sat behind, a barrier of gleaming metal and light. Kira Thel was everything Xena wasn't, sophisticated, perfectly groomed, and wearing a dress that probably cost more than Xena made in a year. Her silver markings had been enhanced with cosmetic overlays that sparkled under the lobby lights, and her antennae were adorned with delicate jewelry. "I'm here for the 2 o'clock interview," Xena said quietly, offering her identification. Kira's eyes swept over Xena with undisguised disdain. "Oh my," she said loudly enough for nearby candidates to hear. "Are you quite sure you're in the right place? The Community Assistance Office is on Sublevel 7. Heat flooded Xena's cheeks as several perfectly dressed humans turned to stare. Their expressions ranged from amusement to pity, which somehow felt worse than mockery. "I have an appointment," Xena insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Xenavos for the analyst position." "Of course you do," Kira replied with theatrical surprise. She tapped her console with manicured fingers. "How? ... Interesting. Tell me, dear, did you perhaps misunderstand the dress code requirements? This is a Fortune 500 corporation, not a charity drive." The other candidates weren't even pretending not to listen now. One human male whispered something to his companion, who stifled a laugh behind her hand. A well-dressed alien couple exchanged knowing looks. Xena wished the marble floor would open and swallow her whole. "Perhaps," Kira continued, warming to her audience, "you'd be more comfortable at one of our subsidiary offices. They're much more accommodating to diverse situations." Xena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She'd worked 3 jobs to save for this opportunity, studied until her eyes burned, practiced interview questions until she could recite them in her sleep. She wouldn't let this polished bully take it away. "Exactly where I need to be," she said, her voice finding strength, "and I'm not leaving." The confrontation was interrupted by the soft chime of an elevator. The lobby fell silent as a tall figure in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit stepped out, his presence commanding immediate attention. Xena had seen Marcus Sterling's face on news feeds and corporate broadcasts, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of the man, the way he seemed to fill the space around him with quiet authority. His steel-gray eyes swept the scene, taking in the cluster of gawking candidates in Kira's frozen smile. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet lobby. Marcus Sterling's question hung in the air like a challenge. Kira's confident smirk evaporated, replaced by the practiced deference of someone suddenly aware their career hung in the balance. "Mr. Sterling?" she stammered, rising from her chair. "No problem at all, sir. I was simply explaining our corporate standards to this... applicant." Marcus's gaze shifted to Xena, who stood frozen between humiliation and defiance. Her opalescent eyes met his steel-gray ones for just a moment before. She looked away, certain he would see what everyone else saw, someone who didn't belong in this gleaming tower. "And what standards would those be, Miss Thale?" Marcus asked, his tone deceptively mild. The lobby had become a theater. With every candidate, employee, and visitor watching the drama unfold, Kira's composure cracked slightly as she realized the trap in his question. "Well, our dress code policy clearly states I'm familiar with our policies." Marcus stepped closer to the reception desk, his presence somehow making the vast lobby feel smaller. "What I'm less familiar with is the policy that allows reception staff to publicly humiliate job applicants based on their economic circumstances." Kira's face paled beneath her cosmetic enhancements. "Sir, I was merely— you were being cruel," Marcus said simply. He turned to Zena, who had been watching the exchange with growing amazement. "Ms. Voss, I presume?" She nodded, not trusting her. Voice: "Your qualifications are impressive. Self-taught xenocultural analysis, fluent in 6 languages. And you've somehow managed to ace our preliminary assessment while working 3 jobs. He glanced at the tablet in his hand. "Tell me, what do you see as the biggest challenge in interspecies?" "Corporate relations." The question caught her off guard. This wasn't happening in an interview room with a panel of stern-faced executives. This was Marcus Sterling himself, asking her opinion in front of a lobby full of witnesses. "Assumption," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We assume we understand each other's motivations, values, and communication styles without taking time to truly listen. Most conflicts arise from projection rather than genuine cultural differences." A hint of a smile touched Marcus's lips. "Interesting perspective. And how would you address that in a corporate setting?" Zena felt her confidence returning as she spoke about something she genuinely understood. "Create dialogue protocols that prioritize curiosity over efficiency. Establish cultural liaison positions, not just translators, but interpreters who can bridge conceptual gaps. And most importantly, hire diverse voices at all levels, not just in entry-level positions." The lobby was completely silent now. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then turned to his assistant, who had appeared beside him as if summoned by telepathy. "Cancel the remaining interviews," he said. "We've found our candidate." The perfectly dressed applicants around the lobby stared. In shock, one of them, a human male in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling, but I flew in from the Centauri colonies specifically for this interview." "Surely you can't mean I mean exactly what I said." Brooked no argument. "Ms. Voss, you're hired. Diana will handle your onboarding." Zena's mind reeled. "Sir, I thank you, but I haven't even interviewed properly." "Don't you want to? I just did interview you." Marcus's smile was genuine now. "In 3 minutes, you demonstrated more insight into our core challenges than most candidates manage in an hour." Besides, his gaze flicked meaningfully toward Kira. "I've learned more about your character from watching how you handled yourself under pressure than any scripted questions could reveal." He turned to Kira, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Miss Thale, please report to Human Resources. They'll discuss your transition to a position better suited to your ... interpersonal skills." But sir, that wasn't a request. As Marcus walked away, Diana, his assistant, approached Zena with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Ms. Voss. Let's get you settled in. You'll be working on Project Harmony, our first contact initiative with the newly discovered Avalon system." Followed Diana toward the elevators, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Behind them, the lobby slowly returned to life, but she could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movement. Some looked envious, others confused, but a few, particularly among the non-human staff, wore expressions of something like hope. As the elevator doors closed, Zena caught a glimpse of Kira, no longer radiant behind her reception desk, but small and diminished, finally understanding that cruelty, no matter how polished, always revealed more about the perpetrator than the victim. Jackson Reeve had worked at Nexus Industries for 8 years, climbing from intern to senior analyst through meticulous attention to detail and an uncanny ability to decode complex communication patterns. He prided himself on being logical, methodical, and utterly professional, which was why he was having trouble processing the young alien woman now sitting at the workstation across from his. So let me understand this correctly, he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Sterling hired you on the spot, in the lobby, without a proper interview, to work on our most sensitive project. His tone wasn't hostile exactly, but it carried the weight of someone whose carefully ordered world had just been disrupted. Zena looked up from the holographic display she'd been studying. 2 days into her new job, she still felt like she was walking through a dream that might evaporate at any moment. I know how it sounds. It sounds like nepotism, interjected Nyx Valdris from her station near the window. The blue-skinned Altarian had been with the team for 3 years and had a reputation for speaking her mind. No offense, but we've been working on the Avalon transmissions for 6 months with no breakthrough. Now suddenly we're supposed to believe the answer walked in from the industrial sectors? The fourth member of their team, Darian Cross, looked up from his own analysis.
Maybe we should give her a chance before we write her off, he suggested.
Diplomatically. The middle-aged human had the patience of someone who'd spent years mediating between different personalities and species. Jackson pulled up the latest intercepts on the central display. Fine, these are the transmissions we've been receiving from the Avalon system. 17 different signal types, multiple frequency bands, no discernible pattern. Our best eyes can't crack them. Our linguistics team is stumped. And the cultural analysis department thinks they might be religious in nature. Zena studied the waveforms, her antenna twitching slightly as she concentrated. Have you considered? They might not be trying to communicate with us at all. What do you mean? Nyx asked, her tone sharp. I mean, what if these aren't messages directed outward? What if we're intercepting internal communications? The equivalent of eavesdropping. On someone's private conversations? Jackson frowned. The signals are too strong, too structured. If they were internal, not internal to their ships or stations, Zena interrupted, then caught herself. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But what if they're internal to their society? Different castes, different functions, different age groups, so using distinct communication protocols that make sense within their context, but seem random to outsiders? Darian leaned forward, interested despite himself. Like listening to one side of 17 different phone conversations? Exactly. Zena moved to the display, her fingers dancing across the controls with surprising fluency. Look at the temporal patterns. These 5 signal types always cluster together around what we've identified as their day cycle. These 3 only appear during what might be their night. And this one, she highlighted a particularly complex waveform, only shows up when multiple other signals are active simultaneously. Coordinating signals, Nyx said slowly, her hostility beginning to give way to curiosity. Or translational ones, Zena suggested. What if the Avalonians have age-based communication differences so significant that they need intermediary signals to facilitate understanding between generations? Jackson stared at the display, seeing the patterns differently now. That would explain the complexity. We've been trying to decode 17 different messages when we should be looking for the relationships between them. Over the following hours, the team worked with renewed energy. Zena's insights proved correct again and again. The signals weren't random transmissions, but a complex web of interconnected communications within a society that compartmentalized information by age, function, and social role. This is unprecedented, Darian said, as their new translation matrix began producing coherent results. They're not just talking to different groups differently, they're using completely different logical frameworks. It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, Zena said, her earlier nervousness replaced by the confidence that came from working in her element. If their species developed in isolated communities that later merged, they might have retained distinct communication methods as a form of cultural preservation. Nyx, who had been running verification algorithms, looked up with something approaching respect. The pattern recognition is holding. We've got actual semantic content in 4 of the signal types already. Jackson removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit when he was reconsidering his assumptions. I owe you an apology, he said to Zena. I thought Sterling's decision was impulsive. I was wrong. We all were, Nyx admitted. But I'm curious, how did you see this so quickly? When we'd been spinning our wheels for months? Zena was quiet for a moment, her opalescent eyes reflecting the holographic displays. "'Cause I know what it's like to be misunderstood," she said simply. "When you've spent your life having people make assumptions about you based on surface appearances, you learn to look for the deeper patterns underneath." The Avalonian ship materialized at the edge of the system like a living crystal, its bioorganic hull shifting through spectrums of color that human eyes couldn't fully process. Ambassador Velith emerged from the vessel after 3 days of careful docking procedures, their form both majestic and utterly alien, standing nearly 8 feet tall. Velith possessed a crystalline exoskeleton that seemed to grow rather than be worn, with neural fibers that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Most unsettling to the human delegation were their multiple sets of eyes, some visible, others clearly operating in spectrums beyond human perception, and the way their form seemed to shift slightly, depending on who was looking at them. Marcus Sterling stood in Nexus Industries' premier conference room, watching the initial greeting ceremony through the observation windows. The formal diplomatic protocols, crafted by the company's best cultural consultants, were failing spectacularly. "The translator keeps referring to our juvenile understanding," Diana whispered, consulting her notes. "And Ambassador Velith hasn't acknowledged Director Hawthorne at all." Below them, Director Rebecca Hawthorne, Nexus's head of diplomatic relations, was growing visibly frustrated. Her carefully prepared presentations were being dismissed, and her attempts at cultural bridge building seemed to be making things worse. "Where's Zena?" Marcus asked. "Conference room B with her team, monitoring the translations," Diana replied. "Should I yes? Get her up here, now." Within minutes, Zena arrived, still wearing the simple business attire that had become her uniform. Beside her, Jackson carried a portable interface loaded with their latest communication matrices. "What's your assessment?" Marcus asked, without preamble. Zena studied the scene below, her antennae twitching as she observed Ambassador Velith's posture and bioluminescent patterns. "Director Hawthorne is following traditional human diplomatic protocol, establishing hierarchies, exchanging credentials, discussing terms. But the Avalonians don't recognize age-based authority the way we do. To them, she's essentially a child trying to negotiate with an adult." "How do you know that?" Marcus asked. "The neural patterns I can see through the bioluminescence," Zena explained, gesturing to her specialized visual organs. "Velith's frustration isn't with our terms, it's with our apparent lack of proper representation. They need to speak with someone who can demonstrate wisdom through experience, not position through appointment." Marcus felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. "They need to speak with you." "Me?" Zena's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm not a diplomat. I don't have the training, the experience." "You have something more important," Marcus interrupted. "You understand them. And after what you've been through, after the way you've handled yourself, Velith will recognize something in you that our professional diplomats can't fake." Jackson stepped forward. "Marcus is right. The communication patterns we've decoded there, not just about age or function. There's something else we've been translating as depth of understanding, but I think it's more specific than that. Trauma," Zena said quietly. "Experiences that transform perspective." Marcus nodded. "In 30 minutes, we're either going to secure the most important trade partnership in our company's history, or we're going to watch it collapse because we couldn't bridge a cultural gap. I need you down there." 25 minutes later, Zena stood in the conference room doorway, her heart hammering as Ambassador Velith's multiple eyes focused on her with unsettling intensity. The aliens' bioluminescent patterns shifted to deeper, more complex hues. Finally, Velith spoke, their voice a harmony of tones that seemed to come from multiple sources, someone with actual depth approaches. "The others carry their experience, like decorations, but you," they paused, their neural fibers pulsing, "you have been shaped by necessity." Director Hawthorne started to protest, but Marcus placed a gentle hand on her arm. Zena stepped forward, her earlier nervousness replaced by the same calm she'd found when analyzing the communication patterns. "Honored Velith, we apologize for the confusion. Our species often mistakes position for wisdom. I am here to learn what we have failed to understand." Better Velith's patterns brightened. "You speak as one who has endured misunderstanding. Tell me, young Deep One, What do your people truly seek from this alliance? For the next 3 hours, Xena facilitated a conversation that went far beyond trade agreements. She helped both sides understand not just what they wanted to exchange, but why those exchanges mattered to their respective societies. When Velith spoke of the Avalonian need for growth through challenge, Xena translated it as their cultural requirement to engage with species that would force them to evolve. When Marcus explained humanity's drive for expansion, Xena helped Velith understand it as a survival mechanism rather than mere greed. By the end of the session, preliminary agreements had been reached that exceeded everyone's expectations. Velith prepared to return to their ship. They approached Xena one final time. "You will be our primary contact," they announced. "Your people choose representatives poorly, but in you, they have accidentally chosen well." After the delegation departed, Marcus found Xena in her office. Staring out at the stars where the Avalonian ship had disappeared. "You realize what you've done?" he said. "This partnership will transform both our species." Xena turned from the window. "I realized something else too. You didn't hire me for my qualifications, did you? You saw something that day in the lobby, something you recognized." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I grew up in the agricultural sectors," he said finally. "Wore hand-me-downs to every interview until I could afford better. The first time I walked into a corporate boardroom, they looked at me the same way. Kira looked at you. So you hired me because you felt sorry for me? I hired you because I recognized potential that others couldn't see. The same way someone once recognized mine." Smiled. "The fact that you've exceeded every expectation I had is just confirmation that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that feel right in your gut." 6 months later, Xena Voss stood in her corner office on the 50th floor, reviewing applications for the newly created Department of Xenocultural Relations. The view from her windows showed the entire commercial district, a reminder of how far she'd traveled from the industrial sectors where she'd grown up. Her reflection in the glass showed a transformed woman. The same delicate silver markings traced her pale green skin, but now they were complemented by professional attire that fit perfectly and spoke of success rather than desperation. Her antennae, once drooped with uncertainty, now stood alert. With confidence, most importantly, her opalescent eyes held a warmth that came from understanding her own worth. Director Voss, her assistant Thomas Chen, appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here about the junior analyst position. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seemed like she really needed someone to talk to." Xena looked up from her datapad. "Send her in." The young woman who entered was clearly nervous, clutching a worn folder against her chest like armor. She was Terran, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested she didn't often see natural sunlight. Her clothes were clean but obviously second-hand, carefully mended in places, but unable to hide their age. "Ms. Rivers?" Xena stood, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged near the window. "Please, sit. I'm Xena Voss." Mir Rivers perched on the edge of the chair, her eyes darting around the luxurious office. "I'm sorry for coming without an appointment. The receptionist downstairs said I should try the employment center instead. But I saw your department listed and I thought." She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "I thought maybe you'd understand." "Understand what?" Xena asked gently. "What it's like to not fit." Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, I've been living in the outer rings since my parents died. Working maintenance jobs, saving every credit I could for education modules. I know I don't look like someone who belongs in a place like this, but I've studied xenocultural theory for 3 years. I can speak for alien languages. I've written papers on cross-species communication theory that the university professors said showed real insight." Xena felt a familiar ache in her chest, recognition of a kindred spirit struggling against the same assumptions and dismissals she'd faced. "Tell me about your research." For the next 20 minutes, Mira spoke with growing animation about communication theory, cultural bridge building, and the potential for technology to facilitate understanding between radically different species. Her insights were raw but brilliant, showing the kind of innovative thinking that came from approaching problems without preconceived limitations. "This is impressive work," Xena said, reviewing the papers Myra had brought. "Self-taught. Mostly. I couldn't afford formal classes. But the public terminals in the outer rings have access to most academic databases, if you know how to look. Mira's nervousness was giving way to cautious hope. I'm going to be direct with you, Mira. You're academic. Background isn't traditional. Your presentation needs work. And you'll face people who judge you based on appearances rather than capabilities. Zena leaned forward. But you have something that can't be taught in universities, the ability to see problems from angles that others miss. Mira's eyes widened. Does that mean it means you're hired? Pending some formalities, of course. But I haven't even interviewed properly. Don't you wanna? Zena smiled, remembering saying almost exactly the same words 6 months earlier. I just did interview you, but the formal process is just paperwork. An hour later, after Thomas had walked Mira through the initial onboarding procedures and arranged for her temporary housing in the company residential complex, Zena stood at her window again. The city stretched out below her, full of people, struggling to find their place, to be seen for who they truly were, rather than where they came from. Her desk chimed with an incoming message from Marcus. Heard you hired another stray. Coffee tomorrow to discuss expanding the department? Zena smiled and typed back. She's not a stray. She's exactly what we need. As she prepared to leave for the day, Diana Mercer appeared in her doorway. I wanted to thank you, the older woman said. For what? What you did with Mira today. Word gets around, you know. There are people throughout the company, people who came from difficult circumstances. People who don't fit the typical corporate mold, then they're watching what you're building here. You're giving them hope, giving them what someone once gave me, Zena replied. A chance to prove that potential exists in places most people never think to look. That evening, Zena took the transit system back to the industrial sectors, not to her old home. She'd been transformed into corporate housing. But to visit the community center where she'd once studied at public terminals. She'd established a scholarship fund there. But more importantly, she came back regularly to talk to young people about possibilities they might not know existed. As she spoke to a group of teenagers about careers in xenocultural relations, she saw her younger self in their eyes, the hunger for something better, the fear that dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford, the barely contained hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would see their potential. The most important thing I can tell you, she said to the assembled group, is that your background isn't your limitation, it's your strength. The experiences that others see as disadvantages can become your greatest assets if you learn to transform them into understanding. After the session, a young Altarian male with worn clothes and bright, intelligent eyes approached her, Director Voss. I've been working on communication algorithms in my spare time. I was wondering if you might look at them sometime. Zena smiled, seeing the cycle beginning again. I'd be happy to.
Hi.
But first, tell me what inspired you to work on this particular problem. She listened to his story, another tale of struggle. Determination and unconventional insight, Inna reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been standing in a corporate lobby, facing public humiliation and the possible collapse of her dreams. Now she was in a position to ensure that others wouldn't have to face those same barriers alone. The universe, she'd learned, had a way of balancing accounts. Sometimes the people who started with the least had the most to offer if someone was willing to look past the surface and see the potential underneath. As she headed home to her corporate apartment, passing through sectors that grew progressively more affluent, Zena carried with her the satisfaction that came not from her own success, but from the knowledge that she was using that success to lift others up. In doing so, she'd discovered something that no amount of wealth or status could provide, a sense of purpose that made every challenge she'd faced worth enduring.